I've started the roll sheet on the back row, so be sure and sign that for today. We are going to start talking about strategies in Chapter 2 for successful organizations. And one of the things that I have suggested to you is that marketing is this pervasive social activity that even individuals engage in. And so what I'm going to start with is I'm going to say that strategies are not just used by organizations, but they're used by individuals. You should use strategies to propel yourself in your career forward. And so one of the things we know, for example, is that more successful people have clearly defined goals, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And so to that end, one of the things that I did in this class is I gave you the grade weighted average critical thinking challenge to try and get you to develop a strategy for how it is that you want to achieve the grade that you want to achieve in this class. Now, if you looked at your grades on D2L, which I encourage you to do, and you need to do that frequently so that you make sure that all your points are there, you might have noticed that a lot of you didn't get the grade that you probably wanted for the critical weighted grading critical thinking challenge. And the reason that you didn't is that some of you completely and utterly failed to figure out the formula that's used to calculate the grade. There were 4 groups that just utterly failed in the math. And so you got 2 points. There were some of you that got the formula right, but your recommendations were completely off base based on the math, so going beyond the numbers, because you didn't read part of the syllabus. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand them back to you. I want the group leaders to come up and collect them, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to redo this critical thinking challenge to earn some more points on it. But here's what you're going to have to do to get those points. So, first of all, I want you to redo it and put a cover sheet on it. And on that cover sheet, I want you to put your group name at the top in center. And then I want you to list members in a vertical column on the left-hand side. List the members of your group alphabetically by last name, comma first. And then 3, attach both your new project stapled to the old project. The old project that you turned in, and I will give you partial credit. I can't give you full credit up to the 10 points because there was one group that not only got the math right, but they also did an extraordinary job with making recommendations that went well beyond the numbers. It's not the recommendation, by the way, that I would have made, but they did do an extraordinary job of going beyond the numbers and making recommendations based on those numbers for the 2 students that were listed. I also have a number of you that are still not showing up on D2L, so what I want to do is as I pass these out, I'm also going to, in your groups, ask the members that have not been listed on my D2L to come up and see if I can't get you loaded into D2L so that we can put your points in. What I'm going to do with the group names top and center in the list of your members is I'm going to establish and set up in D2L groups in D2L so it makes it easier for us to turn in these critical thinking challenges. And so you are still welcome to change groups if you want after today, but you will have to actively let me know that you're changing groups so that I can move you out of one group in D2L and into another. If you decide that you don't like your group, you need to be able to move out of one group and into another. So the first group is ADT, and I think I'm going to turn this off for a minute while I do this. Right where? Okay, all right, good. Just making sure that it's coming around. Okay, so if you will redo those, I will raise your grade. I'll give you partial credit for the answers based on what you come up with, and then I will provide you with the rubric, which is not only the correct answers, but what the ideal answer should be in order to determine a successful strategy for outcome in this course. So, let's talk about goals. Since one of your goals after getting your papers back is probably to improve your grades, let's talk about goals. Your text starts out with, and I think you should know the Ben and Jerry's case study, because when we talk about strategies for successful organizations, the way we define success is in many respects changing in the United States today. Historically, success has been defined as making a huge profit and being overwhelmingly successful, but a lot of businesses, like Ben and Jerry's, which is discussed at the beginning of the chapter, are engaged in other types of success in terms of social entrepreneurship and engaging with their customer and constituency to provide not only profits for the company, but for societal goals and benefits as well. And so I think you should look at that case study as it relates to ethics and sustainability issues, which are a big concern for marketers today. And one of the things that we'll talk about when we talk about ethics. And so all of this sort of integrates together. And one of the things that I want to emphasize over and over again, along with the fact that marketing is the only integrated function of the firm, is that these chapters are also integrated with each other. And so you shouldn't think of them as being distinct and unique silos where it's, you have this block of information. It all sort of combines together. So in talking about successful organizations and strategies for success, that also goes along with the chapter on ethics and how we do that. And it's also going to involve the chapter on pricing and promotion and all of those other things. So as you think about this, think about how this all comes together as a holistic whole. For test purposes, you will not be expected from one test to the other to necessarily have questions that carry over. Each test will be focused on the chapters that are covered, but it does all sort of integrate together, and so there is some overlap. And then, of course, the final is a comprehensive final. So pay attention to that. Look at that first case study, because they do things like engage in caring dairy partnerships, fair trade, and AIDS prevention for their customers to increase social justice and sustainability and ethics issues that we'll also talk about in another chapter. So let's talk about goals. Your text talks about goals, and I think they sort of put the cart before the horse, because they talk about strategy and define strategy before they talk about goals. And I think in order to have a strategy, you need to know what your goals are. And as I suggested to you at the beginning of class, I think one of the things that all of the texts do that's a disservice to you, and it's every single major textbook publisher in marketing that does this chapter, talks mostly about large organizations. And so you have to know about large organizations. And we'll talk about large organizations and what you need to know for the exam, but I also want to make it applicable to your everyday life. And so it's not just organizations or even large organizations that engage in strategy and planning, it's also you as individuals. And as I said at the beginning, we know, this is recorded today, we know that people who set goals are more successful. So what is a goal? Let's talk about your goals. What are your goals? What are some of your goals? What makes a good goal? Somebody give me one of their goals.
Getting a good grade.
What?
Getting good grades.
Getting a good grade. Is that a good goal? Why not? Why is it not a good goal? Okay, I'm not going to say it's not a good goal. You're willing to criticize your colleague here. I'm not as harsh as you are. I'll be more kind and gentle about it. That's a good goal, but could we make it a better goal? So how do we make it a better goal? What's a good grade? You said get a good grade. What's a good grade? An A or a B? Is that still, is that a good grade? Yeah. I have students who, think at the end of every semester that a C is a really good grade. Because they've got a D. They want a C. So they come to me, how can I get a C in your class? Well, if you wait till the last week of class, right before finals, and want to know what you can do to get a C, it may be a little too late at that point. So a good grade. So you want to make, let's be more specific. You want to make what in this class? What do you want to make in this class? Yeah, the one to give you the goal. I'm sorry, yeah, the one that.
I don't know, here.
Let's be more definite.
92.
Okay, so we want an A. Very good. We want to make a 92. And that's a good goal. It's very specific, right? I want to make an A in principles of marketing here at the university. So it's very specific. What else makes that a good goal? Okay, you can measure it. You can make the grade by the end of the semester here at UCO. And finally, the third characteristic of a good goal is it should be realistic. Now, we shouldn't focus on just low-hanging fruit in our goals. I don't want you to think about just, the minimum amount that you have to do. You should have stretch goals, but they should still be realistic. What do I mean by that? You can have a goal that is specific, it is measurable, and it may not be completely realistic because it just absolutely cannot happen. So, for example, if you said, as a freshman, I want to go to the University of Central Oklahoma and graduate with a degree in professional sales in a year and a half. Is that realistic? You cannot physically get a degree at the university in a year and a half. Can you do it in less than 4 years? Yes, that is possible. How could you do it in less than 4 years? You could take summer courses. If you took 18 hours every semester and took summer courses, you could graduate in less than 4 years. You could have clept out of courses. A lot of students do that. Anybody clep out of courses before they got here or take courses in high school? So it's possible to do it in less than 4 years, but is it possible to do it in a year and a half? You physically cannot take that many hours to graduate. Now, you've got a specific goal, it's measurable, but it's not realistic. If you said I want to graduate in 3.5 years, that's a stretch goal, and that is realistic, and it's something that you could accomplish. So goals should be specific, measurable, and realistic. Now, the kinds of goals that we're going to have are going to depend on whether or not we're an individual or an organization. Now, your text is wrong in this. It says there are 2 types of organizations. There are 3 on page 26. The text says there are 2 types of organizations, and it should say there are 3. There are business entities or for-profits. There are not-for-profits, which are non-governmental organizations that don't operate on a profit motive. And then the third category is what? I just gave it to you. What is it? Governmental organizations. Governments engage in strategic planning. We are going to have to engage in a lot of strategic planning. UCO is a governmental organization, isn't it? Who owns this building? The great and sovereign state of Oklahoma owns this building and this organization. And what's happening in Oklahoma currently with our economic system here in the state? We are facing massive budget cuts because of what? Oil prices. Oklahoma is a big producer of oil and natural gas. A significant portion of our state budget comes from oil and gas severance taxes. What is the prediction on oil and natural gas today? According to the 5 largest investment banks, and you all as business students should be keeping up with the news, what do the 5 largest investment banks predict that oil may fall to? Their economists?
$10.
What?
$10.
$10 a barrel. That's what they're saying that oil and gas can fall to, is $10 a barrel. At $10 a barrel, what happens? We have massive amounts of budget deficit in Oklahoma because we're not going to get that taxable revenue. It affects our ability to support services that we provide, things like school. What does that mean for you all in your goals, as UCO has to think about how we're going to plan for these shortfalls? We've already got an order to cut our budget and return money to the state by a certain percentage. What is that maybe going to mean for you all as you begin to plan? Higher tuition and higher fees. because those are things that we can raise to keep the doors open and the lights on. And it's probably going to mean higher fees because that's something that's easier to raise than tuition, which doesn't require as much of a political football. Why is that? That fees are less of a political football than tuition.
They're smaller.
And they just haven't gotten the press that they have. In some schools across the nation, the fees are almost as much or more than the tuition. And so it's basically just a form of tuition without calling it tuition. So we have governments that also engage in strategic planning and goal setting. Now, one of the first decisions you're going to have to make as a business person is what kind of organization you want to be to help you achieve these goals. So what kinds of organizations are there? And this is one of these areas, again, this is going to be an example of how another chapter in the book integrates with this chapter of the book. So we are thinking about business organizations, and one of the things that we have to think about as a first order of business in these business organizations is how are we going to organize ourselves? So your text says that organizations are legal entities that consist of people who share a common mission. So how are we going to organize ourselves? This is not trivial in making our plans for our business. What kinds of organizations can we have? And so what we're talking about is now an integration of strategy with the legal environment. And one of the things that we look at when we talk about environmental scanning, which we'll talk about in a week or so, is this legal environment as part of the environmental scan. And so deciding what kind of organization we're going to be is not trivial, and each has advantages and disadvantages. What kinds of organizations do we have, broadly speaking? Okay, we have corporations. And corporations are creatures of the what? How do you form a corporation? If you want to form a corporation, what do you do? I can sell my legal services. I can sell all kinds of products without being a corporation, can't I? So how do you go about, it's not just about selling products or services, how do you go about forming corporations? What? Okay. Before you can have stockholders, what do you have to do? Make a what? Okay, that's, you can have a trademark without having a corporation. Individuals can have trademarks.
Have a bunch of partners.
Have a bunch of partners? That's a partnership.
Well, I mean, multiple.
You have to apply to be a corporation. Who do you apply? You have to apply with the state. Corporations are creatures of the state. We have 50 states in this country, so you can, that is maybe a decision that you want to think about. Where are you going to incorporate? And this is not a trivial decision because where you incorporate determines what kind of rights your shareholders will have. The original corporation codes were written by Delaware. So Delaware is the oldest code. So lots of corporations actually choose to incorporate in Delaware. Why? Because Delaware wrote the code. So for example, the Bank of New York is incorporated where? In Delaware. It's not incorporated in New York, it's incorporated in Delaware. So lots of corporations are incorporated in Delaware, and lots of corporations that can incorporate in Delaware because the name is already taken, incorporate in other states that follow the Delaware Code. So before I came back to the classroom, I started out here as the Associate General Counsel at the university. I left to go into the private sector. I became an Executive Vice President for a publicly traded corporation. And that publicly traded corporation wanted to be a Delaware corporation, but the name of our corporation was the American Education Corporation. And that name, at the time the company was incorporated, which was back in the 1970s, the late 1970s and early 1980s, was already taken by Delaware, so we incorporated in Nevada, which follows the Delaware Code. So this is the thing that you have to think about when you want to incorporate. Now the advantages of a corporation are, and this is part of your planning process, are what? What's the advantages of a corporation? What can you do as a corporation, and why would you want to do that? Liability. If you don't have some kind of limited liability structure, what happens? So the simplest form of organization to have What I could do is I could go out and I could start a business tomorrow. I could open up a law office, hang out a shingle. Do I have to go down and tell the Secretary of State that I am starting a law practice? Do I have to do that? Do I have to go tell the Secretary, hey, I'm going to start a law practice? Or can I just hang out the shingle at my house and say, Little Grant Aguirre, attorney at law? Okay, so you can't confuse the substantive area of the law that you're going to have with the ease of the business. So this again, and this is part of the planning process, you're going to have to think, can you all go out and start without notifying anybody a law practice? No, that's called the unauthorized practice of law because you're not a what? You're not a lawyer. To be a lawyer, you have to do what? Yeah, you have to go to an ABA accredited law school, and then you have to pass this really horrific test called the bar exam, and then you're licensed. But after that, I don't have to let anybody know. I can hang out a shingle, I can set up a website, and I can run my business without letting anybody know. It's easy to do. I can set up my business. Now, what can you all do without getting any kind of licensure whatsoever? You can set up a business, and what could you do without having any kind of licensure, without telling the Secretary of State you're doing it? What? You can have a lemonade stand. How many of you as a kid had a lemonade stand? Okay, you set up a lemonade. Did you have to tell the Secretary of State? No, you didn't. You set up your lemonade stand. When I first became a professor here at UCO years and years and years ago, I had a student that came into my office. He was one of my first students that was graduating. He was graduating with a degree in marketing, and he said, Dr. Aguirre, I got my first job offer as a marketing student. And I said, well, what is it, Brandon? He said, I got a job offer for marketing communications at a company in downtown Oklahoma City, and they offered me $35,000 a year. And I said, well, that's really pretty good. This was a long time ago, about 20 years ago when I first started teaching. And I said, that's a really pretty good job. And he said, yeah, the only problem is that I made $120,000 last year with my yard company here in Edmond. And I said, well, if your degree here at UCO has taught you anything, it's that you need to keep mowing yards. Because that's the better deal here. Brandon started a yard mowing company when he was in high school to pay for his college education. And he had built it up to the point where he actually had employees under him. You don't have to license anywhere to mow yards, right? You just need a what? You need a lawnmower and maybe a weed eater so that you can do the job well, so that you have good customer satisfaction. He didn't have to tell anybody that he started. He didn't even have to file with the Oklahoma Tax Commission because it's a service and we don't charge sales taxes on services. So you could start a lawn mowing business and not have to tell anybody whatsoever that you're doing this. The disadvantage of that kind of entity is that you have, and for Brandon in his case, one of the problems that you may have in lawn mowing is that what? What?
The season changes.
The season changes, okay. Actually, that could be an advantage. We only have to work 6 months out of the year. How about danger? Lawnmowers are inherently dangerous items, aren't they? They hit rocks and spit them out. How many of you mow your own yard? I used to mow my own yard. I went to law school so that I don't have to mow my own yard. That's what I used to tell my mother when she'd say, would you mow my yard? No. I went to law school so that I don't have to mow. I'll pay somebody to mow your yard, but I'm not mowing yards. I did it the entire time I was growing up in high school. I had to mow our family's yard, and I hated every minute of it. It was a horrible task. I have bad allergies, and so it was not a pleasant experience. But it's an inherently dangerous thing. So if you've mowed a yard, you know what? What happens is you're going over stuff. The lawnmower spits stuff out from under it that hits you. You could have a rock. And that can present a liability issue that you're going to have to deal with if that lawnmower, for example, runs over the rock and hits somebody in the head and blinds them. And now all of a sudden they can go after you for everything that you own, subject to the homestead exemption in Oklahoma. And so the advantage of a DBA, and one of the things that you need to think about in this planning is that, A, it's very easy to set up. You don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to go down to the Secretary of State's office and file paperwork to let everybody know that you're a limited liability type of entity. The disadvantage is you have unlimited liability. Now, there are tax advantages to being a DBA as opposed to a corporation. So for those of you that are accountants, right, you don't get double taxed if you just have a DBA. So that's one of the things that you have to think about in strategy. So there are DBAs. The next most simplest form is partnership. Now, partnership is, again, easy to form. I can start a partnership with another lawyer. I can say, well, I know something about intellectual property. You know something about taxation. We can start a firm, and I can do the IP, and you can do the tax, and we can have a little boutique firm for small to mid-sized corporations that need tax and IP work done. The disadvantage there is that now it's easy to form. The revenue is treated for tax purposes as a sole proprietorship or it passes through, so you don't have that double taxation. The bad part is that now I may have liability for my partner as well. I'm not only liable for my acts, but I'm liable for my partner's acts. So you can have a partnership. Then you can have the traditional corporation. And now lots of states have created flexible creatures that allow you to have something that's sort of a hybrid in the form of things like, and every state's a little different on this, limited liability corporations, limited liability companies, or limited liability partnerships. And some states say, for example, that to have a limited liability partnership, it has to be certain types of learned professions. But those are things that you have to consider when you start to engage in planning. Organizations that develop similar offerings are an industry. So you should know that definition. Organizations that develop similar offerings comprise an industry. And notice that in an industry you may have both for-profits and not-for-profits competing. Rolex is a Swiss corporation that is chartered in Switzerland, and guess what it is? You think it's a for-profit company or a non-for-profit company? It's a non-for-profit charitable organization. Rolex is a non-for-profit. Now, what do they do with their profits? I don't know. They reinvested into making fine watches. I don't really think of them as being a charitable organization, but Rolex is it's a Swiss non-profit organization that manufactures high-end luxury watches. So there's an example of having a non-profit engaging and competing with for-profits. What are some of the for-profits that compete in that environment? There's TAG Heuer at the high-end watch, all the way down to the low end, which is Timex, Seiko, things like that. What about the entertainment industry? Hollywood, right? A lot of that is for-profit. Where do you find non-for-profit entertainment competing in that same industry of entertainment? How about live theater? Most live theaters across this nation, except for Broadway, are supported by what? They're supported by grants and donations from foundations or from government. So the term strategy, your text tells you on page 26, has been highly debated. However, for our purposes, we're going to define it as an organization's long-term course of action designed to deliver a unique customer experience while achieving our goals. Now, what's wrong, given what I've said about how this should apply to you, what's wrong with this definition the text gives you? What's wrong with the text definition? It's what? It's only for companies, and strategy is something that you can also engage in. How do you engage in strategy? So your goal is to get an A in this class. How are you going to do that? What's your strategy for getting an A in this class? Yeah. You're the one who came up with the goal. Everybody else is fine with the D.
You're going to study and put extra time in there and read.
You're going to study, put extra time in. What else?
Watch those videos.
What?
Watch those videos.
Watch the videos, if you've missed class.
Yeah.
What else? Come to class, participate. So if you look at the grade breakdown, one of the things, a significant component of your grade, equal to 1 test score is the critical thinking challenges. For some of those, and for a lot of them, you will actually have to be present to get the points for those. So that's part of your strategy. So individuals engage in strategy as well. And so I think that's important to recognize. What your text talks about is large organizations in terms of structures of organizations and strategy. And I want you to recognize that most of you will go into mid-sized to small firms when you leave UCO. Some of you will go into Fortune 500 companies, maybe particularly those of you who want to go into our sales program, because we get recruited heavily from corporations like Johnson & Johnson and some of those bigger type corporations that want our sales students. But a lot of you will go into mid-sized or small firms. Now, interestingly enough, there's no unified definition as to what is a small business. There's no one standard definition. But I think you have to recognize that a lot of you will go into that. But for the test purposes, you also need to know about large organizations. And so there are generally 3 levels, and the strategy that you engage in, depending on where you're at in that organization, is going to vary depending on the level. So at the top, and these levels also apply not only to large corporations, but also to large nonprofits, things like the Red Cross. They have a national Red Cross headquarters, and then they have Red Cross offices throughout the states that engage in disaster relief. But it also applies to governmental entities. So at the top, you have the top management of the corporate management. In a nonprofit, you also have that top level of corporate management. In the governmental sector, what do you have? So if we take UCO, who's sort of our top management? Yeah, we actually have something that's above the president that's called the Board of Regents of Oklahoma Colleges. And there's an executive director of the Board of Regents of Oklahoma Colleges. So the president, along with the Board of Regents and that executive director, and maybe the vice presidents, would comprise our top management. Now there are schools in the state that have more than one campus. Northwestern Oklahoma State University, Southwestern Oklahoma State University have more than one campus. We don't, so we just have one campus. But we have sort of that top level of management with the president and the vice presidents. And then, under that, you have strategic business units. So, what's a strategic business unit, for example? Walmart is a large corporation. What would be a strategic business unit? So strategic business units oftentimes function very autonomously from the parent corporation or the major corporation. What would be a strategic business unit of Walmart? Their primary big thing is what? Walmart, but what else do they have as a strategic business unit within the Walmart Corporation? Sam's Corporation. And it operates somewhat autonomously, and they have different rules. For years and years and years, Sam's had different rules for their employees and what their employees could wear compared to Walmart. Now, Walmart sort of relaxed and became more like Sam's in the uniforms, but they operated in somewhat autonomous fashion. So at that level, you're going to make difference. So at the top level, what is our president doing? If we think about this in terms of the governmental organization of UCO, we've got this top management, which is the university, which is our umbrella organization. And within that university, our strategic business units would be the what? Yeah, the College of Business, the College of Liberal Arts, the College of Fine Arts and Design, the College of Educational and Professional Studies. And so that's a strategic business unit. What we do in the College of Business is largely autonomous from what they do in the College of Education, because we don't need them for any of our courses. We don't really have a lot of interaction with them necessarily. And we determine on our own in the College of Business what we think we need to offer in terms of courses and degrees and programs. And the College of Education offers different programs than we do. So when we come up with degree programs and when we come up with changes in our degree programs, we do that largely at a college level. We decide what we're going to offer. Nobody really tells us. There is an oversight committee at the university level that sort of approves course changes, but nobody ever tells us we can't do that because they're not experts in what? They're not experts in our field. And that's what these strategic business units do, is they function within their own sort of area of expertise. L3 is a defense contractor. Within L3, there's a division of L3 called L3 Integrated Systems, which works on providing defense contracting to the Air Force in particular. And so that's their area of specialty within the broader organization. And then within those strategic business units, you have functional levels, which at that level, planning and strategy become even more specific. So at the top level, it's going to be setting broad goals. So the president is going to set what kind of goals for the institution. Well, we want to achieve, quality education for the citizens of the state of Oklahoma and the Oklahoma City region in particular as Oklahoma's premier metropolitan university. That's the kind of strategic thing that the president's going to think about. At the College of Business level, what are we going to think about? Well, what kinds of business programs we should offer. And then at the functional level, I am part of the College of Business and the Department of Marketing. So what kinds of things is the department level going to worry about in terms of strategy and planning? Yeah, specific courses that we're going to offer. When are we going to offer principles of marketing? When I first started here at UCO years and years and years ago, 20 years ago now, I'm getting close to retirement. I can retire in a few years. It's going to be nice. I can retire at 55. That's 10 years from now. I'm looking forward to that, counting down those days. But when I first started here, we were a very non-traditional campus. Most of our students were older. The average age of our freshmen at that point in time was 29 years old. So at the sub-business unit level, what did we engage in? Well, our customer demanded something else. A lot of our customers were working adults who needed to get classes in either before they went to work or after. And so when did we start offering classes in the morning 20 years ago, would you guess? We offered classes and I taught them at 7 a.m. Now, at the strategic level, I asked my department chair, I'm up. Something happens to you when you turn 40, you no longer can sleep. And so I'm up like at 5 in the morning and I said, I'd sure like to start classes at 8 o'clock. And she said they won't fail. And I said, when I first started here, years ago, we offered classes at 7 o'clock. Why did we offer classes? Well, if your average freshman is 29 and they've got an 8 to 5 job, they could take a 7 o'clock Monday, Wednesday, Friday class and still maybe make it to work by 8:15. And maybe they worked out a little flex schedule with their boss and they would take less time for lunch that day, but they could make it to work by 8:15 or 8:30 at the latest. Most of our students now, most of you are traditional age students, how many of you would take a 7 o'clock class? No takers? You would take a 7 o'clock class? Wow. A few of you? A few of you are early risers. The vast majority of you, how many of you don't even know that the sun is up at 7 o'clock in the morning? So that's the kind of strategic business decisions we're making at that level. It's very specific and concrete. How are we going to service the customers that we have? So we've stopped offering those 7 o'clock classes. And guess what also happened? The progression of my career has gone on here at UCO, that we've had to engage at this sub-business or this functional level. We used to never offer courses after noon. UCO operated from 7 in the morning until noon. And when I was Associate General Counsel, after noon, at 1 o'clock, you could have fired a cannon in any building on this campus and not hit a soul. Because it was dead until what? 5 o'clock. 5:30, when classes picked up again because people got off work. Now when do we offer classes? And this is something that we've thought about at the functional level. We now offer classes. How many of you have afternoon classes? 2 or 3 o'clock classes. We now offer classes in the afternoon. We used to never do that. So that's the kind of planning that you're going to engage in at that sort of functional level. Strategy and vision. This is a test question. In a book called Built to Last, Successful Habits of Visionary Companies, Jim Collins and Jerry Porras detail what has made some of the most successful companies in the United States today. Now, Built to Last was written about 10 years ago, and there are now people that are questioning whether or not it's really, if it was built to last. But I think a lot of the insights in Built to Last actually are very, very plangent. And so it's a management text. It's been on the bestseller list for a management text for over 5 years when it first came out. And one of the things that these authors found in their study of successful companies that had lasted for long periods of time, the average company that they had identified as built to last had been in business for over 100 years. One of the things that they identified was that those companies had a core set of values. Now, what does that mean, values? What is a core set of values? What? Okay, your mission statement should be derived from your core values. But when we say, and again, this can apply to individuals, highly successful individuals oftentimes also have really strong sets of core values. So what is it that we say when we say we value something? What are some of your values? What do you think about when I say values? What do you value? Huh? Family. Okay? We hear a lot about that, and in the current debate, we're hearing a lot of that in terms of family values. The Republicans are saying that they are promoting traditional family values. You actually hear less of that this election season than you did in 2008. Why is that? They've given up on that issue. Huh? Yeah, one of the things, if you look at, there's a book called Moral Politics, and George Lakoff in that book details the fact that a lot of times, and we'll talk about this when we talk about communication, we mean different things when we say something. We don't always mean the same thing. So Democrats will say, I've got family values, but by family values, they mean what? Well, they mean sort of the extended family. They also mean, aunts and uncles and grandmothers. Hillary Rodham Clinton's book, It Takes a Village. What do Republicans mean when they say family values? And again, we'll talk about this when we talk about communication. Well, they mean the traditional family model. So family values. What else are some things that you value? Honesty. How about that? Is that a value? Honesty, integrity, hard work. Successful companies have these four sets of values, and they almost have a cult-like following, a cult-like personality in the application of these values. And those values drive the organizational culture. So when we talk about organizations, they have a culture. UCO has a distinctly different culture, for example, as an organization, than some of the other institutions in the state. What are some of the other institutions in the state? How would our organizational culture differ from theirs? And maybe our values differ from theirs. What are the two biggest schools in the state? OSU and OU. Are they the oldest institution in the state? No, who's the oldest? UCO. We're the first institution in the state, we're the oldest, and we're the third largest institution in the state. But I would submit to you that their core values and our core values are radically different. When I went to OU as an undergraduate student, I had a professor stand up in the front of the class. It was my first semester in an auditorium with 275 people. And it was an American National Government class, and he walked to the front of the class and he said, I feel that it is my duty to inform you about your college experience, since this is one of the first classes that you'll have to take. How many of you remember that American National Government class that you had to take? It's one of those that you took when you were a freshman that you didn't want to take. He said, if you think I'm here, and he's still there, by the way, to this day, his name's Alan Kurtzky. He said, if you think I'm here to teach you, you're wrong. I'm an assistant professor. I have 4 years to publish 3 major articles and maybe produce a book in order to get tenure and promotion to associate professor. And so that's the real focus of my interest right now. Anything that you learn will be purely happenstance. And in that class, there were a number of graduate assistants, and he said, if you think the graduate assistants, we met with the graduates, so we met 2 hours during the 2 out of the 3 hours for that class with him in the big lecture hall, and the third was met by breaking out into groups that met with these graduate assistants. And he said, if you think those graduate assistants are here to teach you anything, you're wrong. They're working on their PhD, and that's their interest. Good luck with that. You think that's our values here at UCO? No. It's certainly not. What's our mission here at UCO? When I went to get my PhD, I trotted down to OU. I didn't want to leave the great sovereign state of Oklahoma. And I met with the department chair of marketing there, and I said, I'd really like to get my PhD. And they said, well, we'll let you in, because John Caney says you're qualified. But we noticed that you have a lot of experience teaching at UCO. You've been associate general counsel there. And, you know, a PhD is a research degree. You should strive to publish or perish. And teaching is something that one must endure in order to do research. That's a radically different core value, I'm not saying it's wrong, than our values here at UCO, which our values here at UCO are very much focused on what? Teaching. We are a teaching school. Our values are to provide service to you, not to engage in high-level publication. We're expected to do some of that, but it's a radically different set of core values. I'm not saying theirs is wrong. There are lots of good reasons to have research institutions, but it's different. So there's a different culture that permeates that institution than permeates this one. And so these core values drive this. Now, one of the things that they found in Built to Last, and with regard to strategy, is that you didn't necessarily have to have good values. You just had to have a strong set of values. Philip Morris was one of the companies that they detailed in that book as having this strong cult-like personality, organizational culture, and set of values. And the CEO of Philip Morris at the time was detailed as being cunning, ruthless, cold-hearted, and saying things like, I see absolutely nothing wrong with selling people products that they don't need. Philip Morris, of course, produces what? Cigarettes. And it's more than just producing something that people don't need. It's also producing what? Something that's harmful to them, right? So you don't have to have necessarily good values. You could hold up Johnson & Johnson as a company that says, these are our values, and I'll show you those when we talk about ethics. And I think those are really good values. But you've got Philip Morris, and they're very successful. So it's having those four sets of values is important. I would suggest that as we think about sustainability, and we look at the Ben and Jerry's case at the beginning of this chapter, and we think about these things, I would want and hope that you would want to have good values, things like sustainability, honesty, integrity. By understanding your core values, you can take steps to define your mission. Note it's important that companies understand what it is that they're doing. And on page 30 of your text, your authors note Theodore Levitt's seminal book, one of the classics in marketing, not book, articles in marketing called Marketing Myopia. And in that, Levitt says a lot of companies fail because they become too myopic. Railroad companies, a lot of them failed because they didn't recognize, they thought we're a railroad company, they were really good at being railroad companies, but what's the broader industry that they're in? Yeah, they're in transportation, and so you have to think about beyond that. What happened to a lot of, now there's still railroad companies today, but a lot of stuff is now shipped by what? By truck, what? Freighters, and plane. And so if they had thought of themselves not as railroad companies, but as shipping companies, they might have endured more. I have a critical thinking challenge that I want, so I want to show you this video so that you can think about it, and I posted the critical thinking challenge online, but I want to make sure we have enough time to get through this video, so I want to play for you this child room and education by Scott Metro. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about how one of the things that we do in marketing, and as we have progressed as a discipline, is we have, apparently I'm going to have
obvious statement up there. I started with that sentence over 12 years ago.
Okay, so what I want you to think about is what we do in marketing, because we're such a new discipline, is we often steal ideas from other disciplines. And so as we think about strategy, what can we learn from Dr. Mitra about how organizations can engage in strategy and advance? And then this idea of value co-creation. And if you go on D2L, the assignment is posted under the News tab there.
And I started in the context of developing countries. But you're sitting here from every corner of the world. So if you think of a map of your country, I think you realize that for every country on earth, you could draw little circles to say these are places where good teachers won't go. On top of that, those are the places from where trouble comes. So we have an ironic problem. Good teachers don't want to go to just those places where they're needed the most. I started in 1999 to try and address this problem with an experiment, which was a very simple experiment in New Delhi. I basically embedded a computer into a wall of a slum in New Delhi. The children barely went to school, they didn't know any English, they'd never seen a computer before, and they didn't know what the internet was. I connected high-speed internet to it, it's about 3 feet off the ground, turned it on and left it there. After this, we noticed a couple of interesting things which you'll see, but I repeated this all over India and then through a large part of the world, and noticed that children will learn to do what they want to learn to do. This is the first experiment that we did. 8-year-old boy on your right, teaching his student, a 6-year-old girl, and he was teaching her how to browse. This boy here in the middle of central India, this is in the Rajasthan village, where the children recorded their own music and then played it back to each other, and in the process they enjoyed themselves thoroughly. They did all of this in 4 hours after seeing the computer for the first time. In another South Indian village, these boys here had assembled a video camera and were trying to take the photograph of a bumblebee. They had downloaded it from Disney.com or one of these websites, 14 days after putting the computer in their village. So at the end of it, we concluded that groups of children can learn to use computers and the internet on their own, irrespective of who or where they were. At that point, I became a little more ambitious and decided to see what else could children do with a computer. We started off with an experiment in Hyderabad, India, where I gave a group of children, they spoke English with a very strong Telugu accent. I gave them a computer with a speech-to-text interface, which you now get free with Windows, and asked them to speak into it. So when they spoke into it, the computer typed out gibberish. So they said, oh, it doesn't understand anything of what we are saying. So I said, yeah, I'll leave it here for 2 months. Make yourself understood to the computer. So the children said, how do we do that? And I said, well, I don't know actually. And I left. 2 months later, and this is now documented in the Information Technology for the International Development Journal, their accents had changed and were remarkably close to the neutral British accent in which I had trained the speech-to-text synthesizer. In other words, they were all speaking like James Tooley. So they could do that on their own. After that, I started to experiment with various other things that they might learn to do on their own. I got an interesting phone call once from Colombo, from the late Arthur C. Clarke, who said, I want to see what's going on. And he couldn't travel, so I went over there. He said 2 interesting things. A teacher that can be replaced by a machine should be. The second thing he said was that if children have interest, then education happens. And I was doing that in the field, so every time I would watch it and think of him.
Possible, and they can definitely help people because the children really learn to navigate the web and find things which interest them. And when you've got interest, then you can have education.
I took the experiment to South Africa. This is a 15-year-old boy.
This mention I play games like animals, and I listen to music.
And I asked him, do you send emails? And he said yes, and they hop across the ocean. This is in Cambodia, rural Cambodia. A fairly silly arithmetic game, which no child would play inside the classroom or at home. They would, throw it back at you. They'd say it's very boring. If you leave it on the pavement, and if all the adults go away, then they will show off with each other or what they can do, which is what these children are doing. They're trying to multiply it. And all over India, at the end of about 2 years, children were beginning to Google their homework. As a result, the teachers reported tremendous improvements in their English. Rapid improvements and all sorts of things. They said they've become really deep thinkers and so on and so forth. And indeed they had. I mean, if there's stuff on Google, why would you need to stuff it into your head? So at the end of the next 4 years, I decided that groups of children can navigate the internet to achieve educational objectives on their own. At that time, a large amount of money had come into Newcastle University to improve schooling in India. So Newcastle gave me a call. I said, I'll do it from Delhi. They said, there's no way you're going to handle £1 million worth of university money sitting in Delhi. So in 2006, I bought myself a heavy overcoat and moved to Newcastle. I wanted to test the limits of this system. The first experiment I did out of Newcastle was actually done in India, and I set myself an impossible target. Can Tamil-speaking 12-year-old children in a South Indian village teach themselves biotechnology in English on their own? And I thought I'd test them, they'll get a 0, I'll give them material, I'll come back and test them, they'll get another 0, I'll go back and say, yes, we need teachers for certain things. I called in 26 children, they all came in there, told them that there's some really difficult stuff on this computer. I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't understand anything. It's all in English, and I'm going. So I left them with it. I came back after 2 months, and the 26 children marched in looking very, very quiet. I said, well, did you look at any of the stuff? Yes, we did. Did you understand anything? No, nothing. So I said, well, how long did you practice on it before you decided that you understood nothing? I said, we look at it every day. So I said, for 2 months you were looking at stuff you didn't understand. So a 12-year-old girl raises her hand and says, literally. Apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've understood nothing else. Took me 3 years to publish that. It's just been published in the British Journal of Educational Technology. One of the referees who refereed the paper said, it's too good to be true, which was not very nice. Well, one of the girls had taught herself to become the teacher, and that's her over there. Remember, they don't study English. I've edited out the last bit where she said, when I asked where is the neuron, and she says, the neuron, and then she looked at this. But her expression was not very nice. So their scores had gone up from 0 to 30%, which is an educational impossibility under the circumstances. But 30% is not a pass. So I found that they had a friend, a local accountant, a young girl, and they played football with her. I asked that girl, would you teach them enough biotechnology to pass? And she said, how would I do that? I don't know the subject. I said, no, use the method of the grandmother. She said, what's that? I said, well, what you've got to do is stand behind them and admire them all the time. Just say to them, that's cool, that's fantastic, what is that? Can you do that again? Can you show me some more? She did that for 2 months. The scores went up to 50. which is what the posh schools of New Delhi with a trained biotechnology teacher were getting. So I came back to Newcastle with these results and decided that there was something happening here that definitely was getting very serious. So having experimented in all sorts of remote places, I came to the most remote place that I could think of. I crossed the River Tyne 5,000 miles from Delhi. It's the little town of Gateshead. In Gateshead, I took 32 children and I started to fine-tune a method. I made them into groups of 4. I said, you make your own groups of 4. Each group of 4 can use 1 computer and not 4 computers. Remember from the hole in the wall. You can change groups, you can walk across to another group if you don't like your group, etc. You can go to another group, peer over their shoulders, see what they're doing, come back to your own group and claim it as your own work. And I explained to them that a lot of scientific research is done using that method. The children enthusiastically got after me, so now what do you want us to do? I gave them 6 GCSE questions. The first group, the best one, solved everything in 20 minutes. The worst, in 45. They used everything that they knew. News groups, Google, Wikipedia, Ask Jeeves, etc. The teacher said, is this deep learning? I said, well, let's try it. I'll come back after 2 months. We'll give them a paper test, no computers, no talking to each other, etc. The average score when I had done it with the computers and the groups was 76%. When I did the experiment, when I did the test after 2 months, the score was 76%. There was photographic recall inside the children, I suspect because they're discussing with each other. A single child in front of a single computer will not do that. I have further results which are almost unbelievable of scores which go up with time. Because their teachers say that after the session is over, the children continue to Google further. Here in Britain, I put out a call for British grandmothers after my Cookham experiment. Well, with the very vigorous people, British grandmothers, 200 of them volunteered immediately. The deal was that they would give me 1 hour of broadband time sitting at their homes 1 day in a week. So they did that, and over the last 2 years, over 600 hours of instruction has happened over Skype using what my students call the Granny Cloud. Granny Cloud sits over there, I can beam them to whichever.
Okay, so I want you to look, we'll finish watching this on Tuesday, but I want you to start looking at the assignment which is on D2L under the news section for your groups. Also, if every group could have at least 1 person bring a laptop, if you can't, I'm going to see if I can borrow some from the college for the critical thinking challenge that we'll do in class on Tuesday with regard to the ethics portion of the lecture. I'm out of time, so that's a good place to stop. We'll finish watching this. We'll finish up the chapter on developing successful strategies, and then we will move on to oh, we are. Save those for Tuesday.